Welcome, friends, to your very own military history channel. Dosto, a big thank you to all of you who have liked our videos, supported our channel, and sent in your wonderful comments. Many of you have shared your thoughts through emails and the comment section, and we truly appreciate your kind words. A special thanks to those who have given us suggestions to improve. This is your channel as much as it is ours. Dosto, this is an interactive platform where we carefully read and analyze each of your comments. Your feedback helps us grow and bring you even better content. And for those who are new to the channel, welcome. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that you never miss an update. Now, let's begin this year's military history journey with a war that shaped India's strategic defense policies, the 1962 Indochina War. So, Dosto, let's not waste any time and dive straight into Chapter 1. Today, we are going to talk about a turning point in India's history, how Tibet was lost and China became our neighbor. This was a moment that set the stage for future conflicts, including the 1962 war. Dosto, let's go back to 28th August 1959, a day that shook Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. Reports came out in the Indian media revealing that Chinese troops had attacked Indian soldiers in Longju, NEFA. Now, this was a huge embarrassment for Nehru because it completely exposed the failure of the 1954 Panchsheel Treaty. Nehru had signed this treaty with China, believing that both countries would respect each other's borders and live in peace. But China had other plans. Instead of following the agreement, they launched attacks on Indian territory. The media reports made this public knowledge, and Nehru found himself in a tough spot. His dream of Indo-China friendship was falling apart, and reality was hitting him hard. This was the moment when Nehru began to realize that China was not a trustworthy neighbor. But the question is, was it already too late? Despite this betrayal, Nehru still wanted to believe in peace. He was not just thinking about China. His bigger goal was to make India a respected global leader. He wanted India to be seen as a champion of peace in Asia and Africa, a country that stood for diplomacy instead of war. At the same time, he had major challenges at home. Kashmir was still a sensitive issue, and India was focusing on development after independence. Nehru thought that avoiding conflict with China would help India grow stronger. But Dosto, while India was talking about peace, China was planning expansion. And this mistake would cost us dearly in the coming years. The stage was set for the 1962 war. Despite China's betrayal in Longju, Nehru still believed in diplomacy. He wanted India to be a global leader in Asia and Africa, promoting peace and unity among newly independent nations. Instead of taking sides in the Cold War, he wanted India to be a neutral power, respected by the world. But while Nehru was focused on global image and internal issues like Kashmir, he made a big mistake. He ignored the China threat. For India, Pakistan was seen as the only security challenge, and China was wrongly assumed to be a friendly neighbor. While Nehru was busy shaping India's image as a peaceful global leader, he made a big mistake. He underestimated China's military intentions. At that time, India saw Pakistan as its main security threat. 1950 was a turning point. China invaded Tibet, and India was completely unprepared for it. At that time, Tibet was a buffer zone between India and China, acting as a natural defense. But when China sent its army into Tibet, India didn't know how to react. When China took over Tibet in 1950, India lost more than just a neighbor. We lost our strategic buffer. Tibet was like a protective wall between India and China, but after its fall, China became our direct neighbor. This completely changed the game. Dosto, after Tibet was lost, India should have taken immediate action. But instead, there was complete confusion among our policymakers. No one knew what to do. Even in the External Affairs Ministry, officials were divided. Some believed India should strongly oppose China, while others thought diplomacy was the best option. While our leaders were confused about how to respond, the military had its own concerns. General K.M. Cariappa, India's first army chief, made it clear India simply didn't have the resources to take military action in Tibet. At that time, our army was not prepared for high-altitude warfare. While India hesitated, Sardar Patel saw the storm coming. On 7th November 1950, he wrote to Nehru, warning about China's true intentions. He urged India to strengthen northern borders with better roads, rail, and air support, review military deployment, and improve logistics, rethink support for China in the UN, not trust China on historical agreements like the McMahon Line. Dosto, Patel's warning was spot on. After Patel's warning, pressure started building on Nehru to act. Realizing the need for better border security, he formed the Himmat Singh Committee to review India's northern defences and recommend improvements. While the Himmat Singh Committee was reviewing border security, one force was already holding the fort, the Assam Rifles. They were India's first line of defense in the northeastern borders, NEFA, keeping a watchful eye on Chinese movements. While the Assam Rifles stood strong, they faced serious challenges. With limited manpower, widely scattered posts, and insufficient resources, defending India's vast northeastern border was an uphill battle. By the mid-1950s, India began setting up border posts along the McMahon Line and increased patrolling to keep an eye on Chinese movements. While India was strengthening its defenses in the northeast, the situation in Ladakh was even more concerning. The region, including Aksai Chin and the Soda Plains, had large gaps in troop deployment. Why? Because the terrain was brutal, harsh weather, high altitudes, and almost no local population to support military operations. Losing Tibet turned China into a direct, hostile neighbor, forever changing India's security landscape. Nehru's non-alignment policy aimed for peace, but ignored the growing Chinese threat. Worse, India was militarily unprepared, underestimating China's intentions. Sardar Patel saw it coming, but his warnings went unheard. While India was struggling with China's moves in Ladakh and Aksai Chin, another crucial region remained largely unadministered, Tawang and the Kaming Division. After the Simla Agreement of 1914, this region was considered part of India, but for decades, no real administration was established. With China aggressively expanding its control, it was only a matter of time before they turned their eyes toward Tawang. While Tawang was technically part of India, it was never properly administered. And guess what? Tibet took advantage of this. In 1942, Tibetan forces marched into Tawang, took control, and even started collecting taxes from the locals. Now, you'd think British India would react, right? But no, they ignored the incursions, treating them as a minor issue. This sent a dangerous message: Tawang was unprotected and up for grabs. After Tibet's incursions into Tawang in 1942, things became even more complicated after World War II. In a significant development, Tibet formally accepted the McMahon Line, meaning they now recognized Tawang as part of India. This should have been a big win for India, right? But here's the twist. Even though Tibet acknowledged the border, they didn't allow India to establish administrative control over Tawang. The local Tibetan officials continued to collect taxes and control the region, while India's presence remained almost non-existent. It was like owning a house on paper, but never actually moving in, a dangerous mistake in geopolitics. Realizing the urgency, India finally decided to take action. And that's when Major Ralingnow Bob Cutting entered the picture. With China tightening its grip on Tibet, India couldn't afford to wait any longer. Realizing the urgency, Assam Governor Jairamdas Doltram gave a crucial mission to one man, Major Ralingnow Bob Cutting. His task? Establish full Indian administration in Tawang and secure the region before China made its move. With orders in hand, Major Bob Cutting didn't waste any time. In February 1951, he marched into Tawang with 3 platoons of Assam Rifles and did what had been delayed for decades. He established full Indian control. But securing Tawang wasn't just about marching in. Cutting removed Tibetan officials, set up Indian administrative posts, toured villages, and even imposed house taxes, sending a clear message: Tawang was now firmly under Indian sovereignty. This was a decisive and historic move, finally bringing the region under India's governance. This was a big strategic victory, but the question remained, would China accept this, or was another conflict on the horizon? Major Cutting's operation in Tawang was not just a military action, it was a strategic masterstroke. And here's the interesting part. This mission was likely planned with Sardar Patel's approval before his passing in December 1950. Patel had always warned about the Chinese threat and knew that securing Tawang was critical for India's defense. But here's the twist. Nehru was not informed. Yes, you heard that right. The operation was carried out without consulting the Prime Minister. And when Nehru finally found out, he was furious. He had been focused on maintaining diplomatic relations with China and didn't want any aggressive moves that could provoke Beijing. But by the time he reacted, Tawang was already under firm Indian control, a done deal. After securing Tawang in 1951, India pushed further into the northeast to establish control. But in 1953, a shocking incident took place, the Tagan murders. The Tajans, a fiercely independent tribe in Arunachal Pradesh, resisted outside interference. After the Tagan murders of 1953, another alarming development emerged in NEFA's Subansiri region. Reports suggested that Chinese and Tibetan agents were secretly influencing local tribes, creating unrest and resistance against Indian administration. This was no longer just an internal issue. It hinted at a larger geopolitical game. Was China already making moves to weaken India's hold over its border regions? India had to act fast. As tensions grew in NEFA's Subansiri region, India decided to send a column of 7 Assam Rifles under Major R.D. Sinha to assert control. But what happened next was nothing short of a disaster. As the unit moved through the dense, hostile terrain, they were ambushed by the Tajans in a brutal attack. Most of the soldiers were massacred, catching India completely off guard. After the brutal ambush on Major R.D. Singh's column, the situation turned even more critical. The survivors were taken hostage by the Tajans. This was no longer just an attack. It had become a direct challenge to Indian sovereignty. India had no choice but to respond with force. In December 1953, a joint military operation was launched, involving both the Indian Army and the Air Force. The mission? Rescue the hostages and re-establish control over the Subansiri region. After the Tagan crisis of 1953, India had managed to reassert its control over the northeast. But while our forces were securing the borders, a major diplomatic move was happening in Delhi, one that would shape India-China relations for years to come. In 1954, India and China signed the Panchsheel Agreement, or the 5 Principles of Peaceful Coexistence. On paper, it looked like a landmark treaty aimed at strengthening friendship between the two Asian giants. India, led by Nehru, officially recognized China's sovereignty over Tibet, hoping this would create long-term peace and stability. With the Panchsheel Agreement of 1954, India not only recognized China's sovereignty over Tibet, but also made a major strategic sacrifice. We gave up our military presence in Tibet. Before this agreement, India had trade and military outposts in key Tibetan cities like Gyantse, Yatung, and even Lhasa. These missions were crucial for monitoring Chinese activities and maintaining our influence in the region. Not only did India give up its presence in Tibet, but the Panchsheel Agreement failed to clearly define our borders. No proper demarcation was done, leaving key regions like Aksai Chin and NEFA wide open for future disputes. While India trusted Panchsheel's promises of peace, China was quietly strengthening its grip on Tibet. Not only did they increase their military presence, but they also began claiming territories south of the de facto boundary. India thought it signed a peace deal, but China was already laying the groundwork for future conflict. While China was building its military and expanding claims, Nehru remained committed to his Hindi-Chini Bhai-Bhai vision. He truly believed in friendship with China, but failed to see the warning signs. He saw both nations as leaders of the newly independent, post-colonial world united against Western dominance. While India was busy with Hindi-Chini Bhai-Bhai, China was already making strategic moves on the ground. As early as 1951, work had begun on the G219 highway, connecting western Tibet to Xinjiang right through Aksai Chin, Indian territory. While China was secretly building the G219 highway, border tensions started escalating. By the mid-1950s, Barhoti, WJ, in Uttarakhand became a hotspot for frequent accusations and counter-accusations between India and China. Indian patrols reported Chinese incursions, while China denied everything and claimed the territory as its own. This was a clear warning sign. China was testing India's response. While diplomatic talks continued, China was slowly creeping into Indian territory. Under the excuse of reconnaissance and minor incursions, Chinese troops kept entering NEFA and Aksai Chin. Each time, they would come a little further, testing India's response. In 1956, Chinese Premier Chou Enlil visited India with a proposal that seemed like a compromise but was actually a trap. He suggested a boundary swap. China would keep Aksai Chin, while India could have NEFA, and in return, China might recognize the McMahon Line. On the surface, this seemed like an attempt to settle disputes peacefully. But why would India give up its rightful land in Aksai Chin? China had already built the G219 highway through the region. This proposal was just an attempt to legitimize their encroachment. Nehru may have believed in Hindi-Chini Bhai-Bhai, but even he knew that giving up Aksai Chin was out of the question. India outright rejected Chou Enlil's proposal, firmly maintaining that both NEFA and Aksai Chin were Indian territories. Dosto, looking back, we can see how India's diplomatic missteps and China's strategic aggression set the stage for future conflict. Here are the key lessons. Nehru's idealism versus China's expansionism. While India believed in non-aggression and Panchsheel, China was expanding its control in Tibet and beyond. Strategic negligence. India's lack of preparedness allowed China to take advantage of our diplomatic weaknesses and strengthen its hold over Tibet and disputed borders. Sardar Patel's foresight ignored. His proactive approach, like securing Tawang in 1951, was a missed opportunity for broader strategic planning. War was inevitable, with rising border tensions and India refusing to give up Aksai Chin. The situation was only leading towards the 1962 war. While India was busy with diplomacy, China had already changed the map. In October 1957, China officially announced the completion of National Highway G219 linking Tibet and Xinjiang. And guess what? It ran straight through Aksai Chin, Indian territory. The shocking part? India had no idea until it was too late. China had quietly built this highway without informing India, further strengthening its grip on Aksai Chin. This was not just an infrastructure project, it was a clear sign that China was here to stay. The truth is India wasn't completely unaware of China's activities in Aksai Chin. Between 1950 and 1955, Indian intelligence had picked up early signs of road construction in the region. Reports were coming in, but no decisive action was taken. Why? Because Nehru's government downplayed the threat, believing that China wouldn't dare violate India's sovereignty. By the time India sent patrols to check on the G219 highway, China was already in control. One patrol mysteriously disappeared, never to be found again. Others returned, confirming the worst fears. China had built the road, and India had done nothing to stop it. Once the truth about China's encroachment in Aksai Chin was undeniable, India formally protested. Diplomatic notes were sent, objections were raised, but China didn't care. Beijing refused to acknowledge India's claims and instead justified its control over Aksai Chin. When India formally protested China's illegal occupation of Aksai Chin, did China back off? Not at all. Instead, Beijing outright dismissed India's objections and doubled down on its claim over the region. For China, Aksai Chin was non-negotiable, and they had already built the G219 highway to cement their control. China didn't just dismiss India's protests, they erased India's borders from their maps. New Chinese maps completely ignored the McMahon Line and boldly marked Aksai Chin as part of China. In 1959, Tibet rose against Chinese rule, but Beijing crushed the rebellion with force. Amid the chaos, Dalai Lama fled to India, and Nehru granted him asylum. China saw this as a betrayal. Tensions soared. After China's brutal occupation, Tibet faced a devastating famine under PLA control. Food shortages and oppression pushed Tibetans to the edge. By 1956, major revolts erupted in Kham and Amdo, where Tibetans fought back against Chinese rule. As Tibetan resistance grew, China responded with sheer brutality. The PLA bombed monasteries, executed rebels in public, and crushed any sign of defiance. Thousands were slaughtered or imprisoned, and Tibet's rich culture faced destruction under Chinese rule. In March 1959, with Chinese forces closing in, the Dalai Lama made a daring escape to India. Disguised and escorted by loyal followers, he crossed treacherous mountains to seek refuge. India granted him asylum, marking a major shift in India-China relations. Dalai Lama's escape to India was a huge blow to China. When Nehru granted him asylum, Beijing saw it as a direct insult. China accused India of interference, and relations took a sharp nosedive. After years of rising tensions, China finally made its move. In 1959, while India was still reeling from the Dalai Lama's escape, PLA patrols brazenly entered NEFA and occupied Longju and Khenzemane. This was not a minor border violation. It was a deliberate act of aggression. India protested diplomatically, but China ignored every warning. The message was clear. Beijing was testing India's resolve. Would India stand firm, or was China preparing for an even bigger move? The situation was now a ticking time bomb. Was war now inevitable? In August 1959, China took aggression to the next level. PLA forces launched an attack on an Assam Rifles post in Longju, NEFA, forcing Indian troops to retreat. This was a direct military assault, proving that China wasn't just posturing, it was ready for conflict. India lodged strong protests, but Beijing dismissed them outright. After years of downplaying tensions, Nehru was finally forced to admit the truth. For the first time, he publicly acknowledged Chinese encroachments in NEFA and, more shockingly, the loss of Aksai Chin to China. After repeated Chinese incursions and the shocking Longju attack, Nehru finally made a crucial decision. NEFA's border security was handed over to the Indian Army. This marked a shift from diplomatic protests to military preparedness. As tensions escalated, General K.S. Thimayya, one of India's finest military leaders, sounded the alarm. He warned the government that the Indian Army was unprepared to take on China due to lack of resources, inadequate infrastructure, and outdated equipment. But instead of acting on his concerns, the leadership ignored them. While China strengthened its forces, India was struggling with political indecision. General K.S. Thimayya was not convinced by Nehru's sudden decision to hand over any of his security to the Indian Army, and for good reason. He opposed the move, arguing that without additional resources, better infrastructure, and proper planning, the army would be left vulnerable against the well-equipped Chinese forces. But instead of addressing these concerns, the government brushed them aside. Frustrated by Krishna Menon's arrogance and the government's neglect of military preparedness, General Thimayya resigned in protest. Though Nehru convinced him to stay, the damage was done. General Thimayya clashed with Defense Minister Krishna Menon over India's lack of military preparedness. Frustrated, he resigned in protest. Nehru persuaded him to stay, but later publicly humiliated him in parliament. Both the Himmat Singha and Kulwant Singh committees had clearly warned Nehru about the urgent need to strengthen India's military against China. But instead of taking action, Nehru remained overconfident, believing diplomacy alone would prevent conflict. Meanwhile, instead of strengthening India's military, Nehru put his faith in disarmament and diplomacy, believing that China wouldn't betray India. But while India preached peace, China was expanding its borders and building military infrastructure. Nehru sidelined senior military officers, keeping defense decisions in the hands of bureaucrats and politicians. He distrusted the army, believing diplomacy alone could protect India. Meanwhile, China was silently preparing for war. Instead of trusting military experts, bureaucrats interfered in defense matters, weakening both army morale and preparedness. Decisions were made by politicians and officials with little military experience, while China continued to strengthen its forces. Looking back at these events, the warning signs were clear, but India failed to act in time. With the completion of G219, China tightened its grip on Aksai Chin, while clashes in NEFA exposed India's weak border security. The Tibetan revolt and Dalai Lama's escape to India became a major flashpoint, further straining Sino-Indian relations. Meanwhile, Nehru's overconfidence in diplomacy and mistrust of the military left India vulnerable. Instead of preparing for the inevitable, he ignored military warnings and allowed bureaucrats to dictate defense policies. The resignation of General Thimayya was a red flag, exposing deep civil-military tensions and the neglect of India's defense establishment. But despite all these warning signs, India continued on its path of strategic miscalculations. Dosto, this was chapter 1 of our deep dive into the 1962 war. We are working hard to break down each phase of the battle so that you can understand it chapter by chapter. But many of you have asked for detailed notes, and we've got you covered. Our team has prepared exclusive notes in PDF format. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more updated. Till then, Jai Hind.